in a sense, with this 50% tariff burden imposed on India by the United States, has China, in a sense, filled a vacuum with the Chinese foreign minister over here saying, you need rare earths, that's fine, New Delhi, we might be in a position to provide you more of that?
So I think nothing fundamental has changed about either of our countries' strategic interests vis-a-vis China. It's going to be a complicated relationship for decades to come because of China's alternative vision of how the international system should be organized. You talked about all the areas where rare earth materials have technology applications, but you left out one critical category, which is defense.
Yes, of course.
High-tech applications, things like advanced fighter jets, advanced sensors, all of these require as well these permanent magnets. That's why the Trump administration has put a major focus on diversifying our supply chains. And frankly, this is yet another illustration of how the strategic interests of India and the United States converge. It's why it's so important that we work our way through as quickly as possible to resolve the current trade impasse.
Mr. Payat, it's interesting because just last month, President Trump had also spoken to China and appears to have secured or is in the process of securing a rare earths deal yourself. However, the United States has not imposed any sanctions on China for their continued import of Russian oil, but it's impacted India. So A, there are double standards when it comes to oil, and B, if China and America get into an agreement on rare earths, and India and China gets into an agreement on rare earths, then that collective sense of concern that both sides had vis-a-vis China, that needs to perhaps be looked at in a new way. I mean, I would suggest that. What are your thoughts?
So I think both India and the United States are well served by finding ways to reduce China's ability to weaponize its market dominance. So of course, let's reach agreements with Beijing in order to stop the Chinese government's current effort to restrict these technologies, which are so important to both of our economies. But equally important, we have to continue the work that began in the Biden administration so that both India and the United States do not find themselves again in the future in a situation where China is able to cut off supplies in a manner that endangers both our civilian economy, sectors you described, like autos and medical technologies, but also critical defense applications. We should have no illusions about the long-term strategic challenge that China poses to both of our countries, and that has been one of the informing factors in the transformation of the relationship for over 2 decades now.
And Mr. Payat, it's one that I have as a journalist and now as an editor tracked very closely from a situation where India and America just didn't trust each other to having these foundational agreements which really define our relationship. But it really does need to be said that in the last couple of weeks, with the United States imposing 50% sanctions on New Delhi, people over here have no idea which way to look. And they don't know whether the basis or the premise of that relationship, which is trust, has been eroded in a manner in which it needs time to be fixed. What are your thoughts?
So I agree with you completely that there's been significant damage done to the underlying foundation of trust that has enabled us to make progress in this relationship through multiple governments from multiple political parties in both Delhi and Washington. That needs to be resolved as quickly as possible. We have a compelling strategic interest on both sides in finding a way forward on the trade account. For the United States, the Trump administration's overarching strategic goal is to reduce our dependency on China, to de-risk our dependency on key strategic imports from China. You can't have success in that strategy without a strong and confident relationship between Delhi and Washington.
Mr. Payat, India continues to import Russian weaponry. America has all sorts of problems with that. But from New Delhi's standpoint, the import of Russian weaponry is premised on India's strategic autonomy. Now, that's something which many in America continue to have a problem with. But that's another area, right, like the import of oil, which is also India's strategic autonomy, which New Delhi is unlikely to back down on. Do you see this as a hindrance or a problem or a roadblock in the relationship from where we are?
So I think the solution to that is India's own strategic interests. You've seen the record of performance of U.S. defense and military technology vis-a-vis the Russian alternative on the Ukraine battlefield for over 3 years now. And I think the Indian Armed Forces as well understands the tremendous capacity of American defense primes on everything from sensors to advanced fighters to increasingly networked warfare. I view the Russia-India defense relationship as largely a legacy, a hangover, if you will, of the Cold War days. But there is no comparison whatsoever between the kind of technology offering and the partnership that's emerging between U.S. defense contractors working in India with private sector and state enterprises and what Russia offers with legacy Soviet technology. So I think there are a few specific lacuna that have to be addressed. Things like the S-400 and the concerns about some of the technology leakage there. But over the long term, again, I come back to the strategic interest in the United States and in India in charting our partnership going forward, recognizing that India is not going to sacrifice its strategic autonomy, but that the best way for India to strengthen its own security and its defense capabilities is exactly what we've been doing over the past several decades. And certainly if you look at how Russia and China have in fact tightened their security embrace in the course of the war in Ukraine, that argues, in my mind, for even more caution from New Delhi in thinking about its defense relationship with the Russian Federation.
All right, Mr. Pyatt, great speaking to you. Just one small point of disagreement. The S-400, which you alluded to, a Russian system, has done tremendously well for India in just the last couple of months against Pakistan, in downing several aircraft and the like. But that's a separate conversation. I take the larger point that you're raising. Thanks very much, sir, for sharing, your views on this.